You're listening to Centered. Thank you for listening and subscribing. This week, Trump goes to NATO as uncertainty takes hold over Iran. Our special guest is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Joel Rubin, who will help us break down the debates unfolding over how much damage was done to the Iranian nuclear infrastructure and the divide in both parties over the broader strategy in the Middle East. Also, Democratic primaries in the New York mayoral race and in the special election for Virginia's 11th district highlight a significant shift in the Democratic Party. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Jeremy Murphy and Carl Meacham. Joel, you recently hit a milestone in terms of the audience you're reaching, top 100 on Substack, so congratulations. But more importantly, you've worked inside the State Department during critical moments, you've worked in the U.S. Senate, and you advocated for the Obama-era deal with Iran that the first Trump administration tore up. So thank you for joining us.
They ripped it all up. Thank you, Luis. It's great to be with you and Carl and Jeremy. This is going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk shop.
Excellent. Well, Joel, there's not much going on. Don't know why we have you on here, but seriously, thanks for being with us. Just to go right at it here a little bit, we just heard from the intelligence community now, from the DIA, that they're operating with low confidence right now about the status of Iran's enriched uranium. And that's important because today, in today's press briefing, Secretary Hegseth seemed to downplay the threat altogether, suggesting that the uranium was either neutralized or it was either neutralized and it wasn't moved before the strike. The White House keeps on denying reports that Iran moved the enriched uranium, and they're pushing back pretty hard. So if the uranium is out there, because it seems that folks have that big doubt. Nobody is saying with a lot of certainty where the uranium is. How long do we have before this explodes again? And what's your view of the uranium search?
Well, Carl, look, man, it's great to be with you and all you guys and talk about this and this sort of explosive moment that we just witnessed over the last couple of weeks. Really, I think sort of ran counter to a lot of assumed narratives over the past number of years related to Iran's nuclear program. Just to baseline it, there was an Iran nuclear program for a number of years that Obama organized a deal based upon multiple years of diplomacy, actually started during the Bush era and kind of going highs and lows, and eventually ended up with a nuclear deal that in 2015 had capped the amount of enriched uranium that Iran could have in the country and make sure it was at very low levels of enrichment, 3.67%. And this, for the Iranians, was like a central part of their identity, their national security strategy, their ability to say that they were an independent country and have that enrichment. You fast forwarded a few years, Donald Trump got out of that deal very unwisely. It ended up freeing up the Iranians to enrich, and where they ended up only a few weeks ago having 60% enriched uranium at levels where they had enough supply on hand to, if they were to weaponize it to 90% and then build the bombs out of it, have 9 to 10 nuclear weapons, way beyond anything they had a decade prior. And the International Atomic Energy Agency said as much. And because of that, they slapped them on the wrist with a censure resolution for the first time in 20 years. So real runaway program. And so the sites that we hit after the Israeli strikes, which were highly debilitating of Iran's defensive capacity, Israel eviscerated the military leadership, destroyed their air defense systems, and had free reign over the country. But Israel could not do the big deed, which is to blow up the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility, the 300 feet underground bunker that we and others have been looking at for 15 plus years now as the core of that nuclear program. And so the bombs went, President Trump ordered it, a dozen bombs dropped, 30,000 pound bombs from B-2s, the MOPs, and really obliterated that site as well as Natanz and Isfahan, which also had facilities, conversion facilities and other enrichment facilities that would have helped build the infrastructure to enable Iran to weaponize. So Where is the enriched uranium is one question. But after that, can they actually take that enriched uranium and weaponize it? I just don't think that's viable. I don't think that's possible. What we saw with the intelligence community assessment is unclear still. It's not a unified assessment. There are 18 agencies. One agency, the DIA, which is typically off anyways amongst the agencies. There was a leak out of it, but it was a low confidence leak. I think we're going to see more integrated assessments. But to me, what I'm looking at is the Israelis and the Iranians both basically said that Iran's nuclear infrastructure was decimated. And so then the question is, do you find that enriched uranium? How does that happen? This could be a search for months. This could be the Israelis on the ground, quite frankly, looking for it. But can Iran sprint to a bomb in some new facility that nobody knew about with lots of infrastructure nobody ever heard about? Highly doubtful. So I think this program, for all intents and purposes right now, is dysfunctional.
Okay. And I mean, that's really good. That's a good assessment. I'm just trying to figure out, though, did you see this as a lifeline to Netanyahu? Just months ago, yeah, he was drowning in criticism over Gaza. Now he's emerging from this 12-day war with Iran, looking like he pulled one off. One of the biggest strategic comebacks in Israeli history. And, did this war just rescue Netanyahu? And at what cost do you think this will be regionally?
Yeah, it's a really astute point. Look, Netanyahu is deeply unpopular in Israel. It's just he keeps on getting reelected. Yeah. And, so what do you make of it? The opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who was his predecessor prime minister, gave him a bear hug at the beginning of this war against Iran. Israelis are unified in their contempt for two things, Bibi Netanyahu and Iran. But, they supported Netanyahu. They supported their troops. Interestingly, and this is one of the paradoxes of Israeli society, Netanyahu's base is in many ways the religious community, people in the settlements, people who are very much to the far right of society. And the national security community, the military operators, the intelligence professionals are generally secular, Western-leaning people from Tel Aviv who don't like him. Those are the people who just defeated Iran physically. And so you have this dynamic of Israel as a whole coming together. It certainly gave him a new lease on life for a moment. He's asking for a little bit of a delay in his trial, which is an ongoing saga. He has new elections in 14 months. I do think that there's an upside for him politically from this, without a doubt, certainly because the execution went basically better than they could have ever hoped for. And they got the U.S. to come in off the sidelines with minimal cost to the United States, which is stunning and was not predicted. Yeah. And so, good for him. But I don't think he launched these strikes to save his skin alone. I think that in the bigger picture, and you could argue that he's staying in Gaza to keep his coalition together, and that keeps him going. But there was a strategic window available to Israel that they had never experienced before vis-a-vis Iran, which is that all of the military hedges that were aimed at Israel over the past couple of decades that were created by Iran through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have been decimated. And that means Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, they destroyed. That means Hamas. That means the Houthis. And what this basically means, in a nutshell, is that Israel saw open skies and they went for it. And I think that was what was the biggest motivation.
That's an interesting point. I have a question. The saber rattling, the neighbors didn't really come to their defense. You think, Iran put the call to arms and no one really rushed to their defense. And in fact, when Iran attacked our bases, they kind of pre-called us to let us know, hey, where is this call to arms? Iran really, they're funding all these groups, but where are they?
They were on their own, weren't they? Russia, and by the way, I didn't even mention that Assad, their number one client, fled to Moscow about half a year ago, right? So Iran really was on their own. None of their proxies came to their defense, basically because they couldn't physically. And then Russia did not support them. Nobody came to their defense. The Arab states condemned it and then helped the United States shoot down missiles that were going towards Israel from Iran. And that's telling. Iran has been a bad actor in the region. There are a lot of reasons why we had diplomacy with Iran. It was primarily to prevent a war. It was to try to hem in this program. But when it comes to Iran at this moment in time, it did not rally the network that it spent 40 years cultivating. And that should be a moment now for Trump. I'm not confident he will, but he should take advantage of it diplomatically. He should try to find a new arrangement forward with the Iranians. We're still negotiating. Interestingly, Steve Witkoff is going to talk to the foreign minister, so maybe there is something to be had there. We dropped the bomb, we nuked Japan, and then afterwards we signed an armistice agreement and moved forward. Yep. The same should be done here. There should be a diplomatic way to lock this in and then move forward.
And then thinking about the politics of this, they're very strange bedfellows in terms of the politics, both as you pointed out in Israel, but also in the United States. The interesting thing, you sounded very confident about the intel assessments and the level of destruction of the nuclear refinement facilities. But the narrative on the left leading up to the strikes was that there was no WMDs, that this is 2003 all over again, that this is a buildup towards war with Iraq where there's not an actual evidence of WMDs, and that we're basically being dragged to war by Israel. How do you reconcile that, and where do you see the split on the political side falling with regards to the confidence in the strikes?
Well, I do see the progressive side of the ledger really moving to an anti-war mode. Now, it used to be a decade ago when we would talk about Iran, much of the messaging and the argument articulated by President Obama was anti-nuclear proliferation. But now it's anti-war. And, my fear, my concern, and I've had a bit of a debate with folks on this, is that there's almost an acquiescence mindset towards allowing Iran to get a nuclear bomb because nothing should justify a military attack against Iran. That's the mindset that they had. And so it's true. And Tulsi Gabbard testified in March and basically the DNI and said they have not made a decision to weaponize. And then President Trump basically said that's bullshit. Now, who's right, who's wrong? I think they're both probably right. But the facts are the facts. And the facts are that the IAEA said they had enough material for 9 to 10 bombs and that they were a week to 10 days away from moving them into weapons grade at that level if they wanted to. And the Israelis looked at that, and the Israelis live there. Right? Like we don't live there. And you just saw what they did to Israel with hypersonic missiles. They bombed the crap out of Tel Aviv. You stick a nuclear weapon on one of those and it's over in Israel. Why wouldn't they do it? And I hate to sound like a scaremonger, but that really was the dynamic. And so, on the left, I think the mindset was let Iran have its nuclear enrichment capacity and just deal with it. Because it's better to not have a war because it would be as bad as Iraq. And in the Israeli world, it was no enrichment allowed. Interestingly, Marco Rubio offered to get a civilian nuclear program into Iran's hands to get the enrichment out, and they said no. Europe has moved towards the no enrichment side. Israel has always been pushing for that. That was always the hardest part of this negotiation. And I think that the sense was they can't have it, and they just can't have it. But I don't believe we would have launched a war on our own. I do think that Israel's attacks facilitated our involvement because they cleared the path, but they also couldn't take out the whole infrastructure on their own. And I think Trump saw that and saw a low-risk strike from his perspective. And last thing I'll say, this defying the sort of skeptics in his party as well as in my party did not get dragged into a massive land war in the region to find all their nuclear sites. And just that's sort of like the big stunner that I think people are still trying to wrap their heads around and can't quite believe. And now we're trying to message that the uranium is gone. The enriched uranium is somewhere. It's all a ruse. It's all a ruse. I see it. I see people texting me. I'm just like, they're not building the bomb again. They're going to get clobbered again. And the Israelis just picked off their top 30 generals with direct drone strikes. I mean, give me a break.
I think this is a key point, Joel. If this was, from the perspective of the Americans, a one and done, And there's all of these divisions within MAGA. Tucker Carlson called the strikes a betrayal of America first. Marjorie Taylor Greene blasted him for bypassing Congress, which is different, given the environment that the Republicans have been just rolling over in Congress for the president for some time now. But it just seems that Trump has overplayed his hand a little bit with this. I don't think that there's will in the Republican Party for an ongoing type of involvement.
Right.
But it doesn't seem that the Israelis are going to be, trigger shy. They're going to go back in if they need to. Is that the correct assessment? Do you think that Israel pretty much used our strike to show that it has someone big behind it and that it will continue using its own wherewithal if necessary?
Well, I think the Israelis have basically made it clear that they're going to continue to operate if they think that there's a threat, and they're going to continue to go there. And this they called it the Lebanon model, which essentially means just keep going and going and going, which is a very dangerous dynamic. It's not a great thing at all. This is why I think we need to have a diplomatic arrangement with Iran where they really commit to never building a weapon, and then we can move in with sanctions relief and move in a different direction with them. Absent that, we're going to have this what they call mowing the grass, the technical term, by Israel. So is it a one and done? It might very well be. But the Israelis have also said that they think they set back the program by years, which would lead one to believe that they don't need to strike again for some time. And if they're saying that, if they don't say, well, it was half done and we got to go back in, but they're saying it's done, then they don't have the justification to go in anytime soon. But, I think they're probably going to continue to do as much as they can with their spy network as they have been for a number of years. Yeah. And so this is like one stage in a hot war or sort of slow boil war between these two. But really, the nuclear program was always the big enchilada, and that's been eaten.
I think the one thing that's not being said is there's a crazy man at the Situation Room at the head of the table. And I think a lot of these countries are not acting because they don't know how he's going to act. He's so unpredictable.
Yes.
And, he turned bombing Iran into a reality show. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. How does that unpredictability of you're dealing with a man who's irrational, how is that playing into diplomacy and the State Department and looking at the world?
I mean, the problem here is that you can't trust him or what he says, right? So like a couple of months ago, he says, we're going to cut a deal. But it got to this break point and then he flipped. Same thing goes in reverse, NATO. Like I was on MSNBC yesterday and I was waiting to speak and they had me sit there for the whole 45-minute presser at NATO. And if I had closed my eyes and not known the voice, I would have said, he generally sounds like a traditional American president on NATO, because he was saying how important NATO is and it's a valued partner and they have their interests and now they're giving 5%. So it's crazy town, right? It's crazy. And you just don't know what you're going to get. So from an alliance management perspective, I think it's incredibly difficult. I think that there's a lot of tributes that have to be paid to this guy, the $1 trillion of new NATO contributions or the money that the Qatari airplane. I don't know what the Israeli tribute is, but I have a feeling, we could guess, his political base. There's a lot of it that really loves this. But I don't, the State Department people I talked to over there and the engagement it's just a wild ride. And in many ways, there's no input. And that's the danger here, is that one man is not omnipotent. We have a whole system and infrastructure. And in many ways, what just occurred is a validation of the American deep state, shall I say it, Steve Bannon. The deep, long-term research and investment in intelligence gathering and weapons design and building. Now, Elon Musk probably would have, deleted many of those weapons programs because he would have said it was wasteful, it was too much. You never know when you're going to need it. Our diplomatic expertise and prowess with NATO is what got them to all agree to move up the 5%. Making that work well matters. They're also now restaffing the National Security Council, putting people back in who they had fired. So we got to get a hold of this beast, because if he's
you look at that
wild riding,
table.
it's a problem.
You look at that table in the Situation Room, and it was like a Rorschach test of who's dumber. I mean, you got a president with a red lyric campaign hat. It should be a helmet. You got, J.D. Vance getting Scooby's necks under the table. You got like Hegseth's white knuckling it. Gabby's nowhere to be found because they don't trust her. I'm like, who's minding the store here?
Well, and if you look at what's going on with Europe too, though, is that they weren't brought in on any of this, but they were vital to the original JCPOA that was worked out during the Obama years. And so it'll be interesting to see if Trump is able to not just, capitalize on the 5% for NATO, but actually pull in the Europeans to help rein in that Iran doesn't get to a point again where Israel has to go in.
As I like to say, it's like, can he snatch? He might just snatch defeat from the jaws of victory here, and so that's my big concern. Like to your point, our allies, the Europeans, they all matter. We got to amp up, supercharge the diplomacy, not walk away.
And that's why it's also troubling that this same week we're also seeing a spate of firings expected at the Department of State, or RIFs, the reduction in force that might trim as many as 3,000 people. And that's incredibly problematic because, like you said, the deep state, the what they derisively call the deep state, but what is the career federal workforce that actually does the hard work, is what's impacted. And that makes it harder for us to capitalize on these successes, or to at least move forward to building the possibility of a success.
That's right. I mean, look, I was a civil servant for a number of years at the beginning of my career. These are patriotic people. They're really doing it for the love of country, especially its state and defense. These are people who are really committed. We can have a lot of critiques about their work. It's important to have oversight, like Carl did the oversight work in Congress, and that's actually good, right? Like the idea that Trump is now sidelined in Congress and not reporting to me is like a horrible thing. We actually need all the components of the American government who are involved in national security to be engaged, to make sure that we're making the best decisions, to make sure that we're having the best follow through. Congress should be a pain in the ass to the State Department, ask the hard questions and make them refine their work better. They shouldn't be blocked from even asking questions. The less questions the dumber you get, right? And so that's my big fear. And the state, one of the challenges is that they fired a lot of people who are in the international security space, which happen to be experts on nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear weapons issues. We need those people right now to help us with tracking down uranium, with ensuring that black market stuff is not sent around. There was this thing called the Nunn-Lugar legislation that Carl knows intimately, where it was capturing the loose nuclear material in the former Soviet Union that was sitting in abandoned warehouses with rusted like locks. That was it, right? Like, this takes who? Donald Trump running around? No, it takes professional U.S. government employees who are dedicated to protecting the United States, and we need to keep those people working, not fire them.
The things that Joel are saying, the things that we need in our bureaucracy, are vital to allowing for us to do a good job to protect our security. And this government has, in its effort to do away with the administrative state, is throwing the baby away with the bathwater. And that's something that we need to be very concerned about. Joel, you mentioned the Non-Proliferation Legislation Act of Senator Lugar. That was the whole trust but verify. That we used to push there, and that Ronald Reagan was pushing. And this is the kind of thing that would come in handy in a situation like this one. But I think our institutions have been so whittled down that being able to do that work, it's only leaving us few options, right? And it just seems that this cycle of confrontation with Iran through Israel, and then maybe involvement by the United States in a greater capacity, it just seems that this is going to be the cycle, and this can go completely sideways, as you know, Joel. I just don't see this going any other way. I mean, enlighten us. Give us some hope. Where do you think this could go?
Hope is a hard emotion to have when you work on Middle East issues.
Yeah.
You know, my rosy scenario is that Iran, chest thumping and all, as the supreme leader is doing right now. He came out from his cave bunker and said he's still alive, and that's great for him. But like, I think the slamming, decapitation, obliteration, neutralizing, whatever term you want to use, of the nuclear program, and the devastation that its proxies have experienced opens up a window for new dynamics in Gaza, new dynamics between Israel and other Arab countries, the potential for a broader Israeli coalition to support Netanyahu to get rid of his far-right extremists. It's all there for the taking. This was always used in many ways by the far right. And remember, you know, when you have an enemy, you can use that to demagogue and unify your people against that enemy. When you defang Iran, as they have done, who's to blame next? This is it. Many hard decisions have been kicked down the road in Israel, focus on Israel, for this reason. Now that reason is gone. And the same thing for Arab countries who have always been nervous about being between Israel and Iran could strafe them like the Iranians were going to blow up all the oil fields in Saudi and all. No, the Arabs managed this well. They didn't piss off the Iranians. They've built better relations. So this is this weird dead time. So my argument is, this is when we work with our European allies and work with our Arab allies and even pull in Russia and China if we need to, because fine, they have influence there. Let's get realistic here and try to find some securing agreements that bring stability to the region, that end the war in Gaza, that moves Hamas out, that lets the Palestinians get aid, that builds new relations potentially with Iran going forward. Just because we took an action against them doesn't mean we're forever enemies. We have a great relationship with Vietnam now. So I think that's what has to happen. That's what gives me hope, that this big Goliath type of adversary in the region has been defanged, and that opens up new opportunities.
So
That's a really
I have
great
a question
point.
here. So I saw a documentary. I've read a lot about it. Clinton, I think it was in 99 or 2000, brought Arafat to Camp David, and they actually proposed a Palestinian state. And Arafat denied. Arafat said no. And offline, it was like he knew that Hamas or someone would kill him. They didn't want that. Do these people want it?
So that was Ehud Barak, right, in 2000, January 2000, the Camp David negotiations, and Arafat multiple times kind of, it's the great irony here is that if he had accepted that deal, they would have had like 97% of the West Bank and Gaza and parts of Jerusalem, which is exactly what people now scream they need to have. I do think a lot of Palestinians want it. I think that the Palestinian politics inside of Gaza, Hamas is dominated. They also happen to have started a war that basically got their entire territory destroyed. And new voices have to show up. What that means is that the Israelis have to let those new voices come forward. The Israelis also need to cap their extremists. There's a lot of settler violence now against Palestinians in the West Bank. It means that there has to be oxygen for the Palestinians to build a new infrastructure leading to a state. And that is going to be hard, but that's required. So I'll just answer your point. Arafat was worried about getting maybe a bullet in the head from his extremists. I mean, Yitzhak Rabin from Israel got assassinated for making peace. There's going to be these extremists now, but this is a window where things are in flux, where we have new governments in Syria, where the Iranian government has been smacked around significantly and its worst weapons taken out for the time being, but taken out. And where Trump, being a wild card, he just got out of the Gulf. He has a chance here. Will he do it? Will they take advantage of it? I worry about that. But I do think that the Israelis are going to have to get a talking to about giving the Palestinians some freedom to actually build up something productive and moderate. And the Palestinians are going to have to also make a decision about whether they want to live alongside Israel or not. And I do think a lot of them at this stage would be happy to do that and end this war.
And we can end on that because I know we're close to the 30 minutes, but I do think it's important to highlight that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is creating tremendous damage to Israel's image in the entire world.
Horrible. Yeah.
And it's certainly having a significant political impact here in the United States. Joel, you led Jewish community outreach for Bernie. So you had a front row seat to the progressive movement kind of shifting away from the Jewish community. But how do you see the election of Zohran Mamdani, who couldn't bring himself to condemn the term global intifada, and what it could mean for Democrats in the midterms and the run-up to the 2028 primary?
I'm really glad you asked that question. I got to go.
Bye, Felicia.
Technical difficulties.
Time out. A couple of things. First of all, candidate quality for anybody who's run for office or worked on campaigns. That actually really is what's most important. And boy, did Andrew Cuomo lay a stinker in that campaign. He was just the worst candidate. He just ran a horrid campaign. It took it for granted and got what he deserved, which is to lose. Mamdani was a highly energetic, charismatic, interesting candidate. And so he mobilized the base. The thing that worries me and that worries a lot of Jewish voters who care about Israel, and there's a slice of Jewish support in New York, a sizable chunk, 15, 20%, maybe a good chunk that supports Mamdani that does not care about Israel or even like Israel, and frankly his antipathy towards Jewish community infrastructure and the establishment. So that's the sort of base that we're talking about here that you're bringing up. But for the broader Jewish community, I think the big fear is that the animating factor for Mamdani was his anti-Israel activism and his sort of loose language about Jews in Israel, and this idea of globalizing intifada as if it's passive and benign. Bullshit. It's like a call to frankly scare the hell out of Jews, and frankly has been used as a slogan throughout the decades that frankly has led to incitement against Jews here and in Israel, and including terror attacks that are part of the intifada. So I mean, it's like so tone deaf. And if you're going to ask a community to vote for you and support you and be your constituents, why would you not even begin to say that language upsets you, I'm not going to use it? Like, why would you intentionally cling on to language that they're telling you is terrifying? So I'm a little worried about that. And I think, he has a very interesting challenge here, which is that he's going to probably run in a multi-candidate general election. Well, he's going to run in it. It's probably going to be multi-candidate. At least one Eric Adams is in, and then one Republican. So 3, maybe another 2. So his real question is, does he continue to play to the base and keep that language and just keep rolling with it and hope that gives him the plurality? Or is he going to do the classic pivot and go to the center and calm that down, and at the risk of the base, which frankly got extraordinarily excited by his campaign because of that rhetoric? So I'm a little worried about what this means for the future of Jewish Democrats who care about Israel. We're all kind of feeling a little bit homeless politically these days, not because we don't like being Democrats, but because we're seeing trends in the party that seem to tell us that we can't think and be the way we want to think and be. And that if we're uncomfortable, we just have to kind of deal with it. That's not cool. But that doesn't mean we're necessarily Republicans either. So this is the challenge. And the last thing I'll say is that in New York, there's a major chunk of the Jewish electorate which are Orthodox. Mayor Adams went to the Rebbe, the Orthodox Lubavitch Rebbe's home to kick off his campaign today. They are very MAGA. They are very Republican. I doubt they'll vote for the Republican. I bet they'll vote for Adams. And so New York has this big Orthodox, non-Orthodox split that is more pronounced there than any other city in America. So we're going to probably see a lot of Jewish versus Jewish political fighting throughout the next 5 months, which is, of course, never good for the Jews.
Yeah. Well, Joel, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations on the top 100 ranking on Substack and this kind of space. I think the fact that you're having such success is also like one of the things that is so important about this space, that if you were doing this on MSNBC or Fox, it would have been a 7-8 minute hit, would have been very little that you would have actually gone across. And I think we had such a substantive, important conversation here and so valuable. So thank you.
This was great fun. You guys really brought out the goods today, and I'm really grateful that you included me in it.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Diving a little deeper on the electoral dynamics, as we were just talking about with Joel, the front runner now, or the person considered the front runner in the mayoral election for the November general election, is Zohran Mamdani. Newsweek was reporting that the expectations are, upwards of 70% that he'll now be able to get the victory in November. But of course, in May, Cuomo had said that he planned to run as an independent, so we may not have seen the last of him. And given Tuesday's results, I can imagine he's probably just going to bow out now, but it's not definitive. And then Eric Adams, although he has some baggage like Cuomo, he shows up everywhere. He's likely to be a much more effective campaigner than Cuomo was. And so he comes at it with a whole different approach that I think still raises questions about what's going to happen in November. I don't think we can be sure of what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah, I think, the result, to me, it's not a breakthrough. It's a fantasy. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in upstate New York. I know Jeremy lived there a long time. I don't know if you're originally from New York, but I think
I am.
I understand how deep blue New York is, but Mamdani's win, for all its symbolism, it's not a roadmap for Democrats nationwide. I get the appeal. I get the newness, the social media, how he energized a whole bunch of folks, the values-based campaign, but governing isn't about these vibes, and it's about results. And his promises of free buses, universal health care, sweeping social programs don't come with a clear way to pay for them. And the governor of New York has already signaled that she wouldn't raise taxes. Albany's not on board. And this is like a classic situation where the candidate overpromises and will underdeliver on the politics. So, I see it as one of these situations where, you have a lot of people doing this for the passion, right? But the reason isn't there.
At the same time, we do have to look at the fact that the Democratic base did like a lot of what he was talking about in terms of affordability. Just the cost of things is outrageous and out of control on everything from housing to food to everything else. And so I think Democrats do have to figure out a way how to address that. And not all of the ideas should be dismissed outright. And I think that'll be part of what gets fleshed out in the general election. But Jeremy, you were living in New York. You've lived in New York for more than 20 years.
Well, I think this election is seismic because it's literally going to get Eric Adams reelected. The business community is gonna back Eric Adams because they don't want to back this guy, and they all back Cuomo, and he ran a horrible campaign. It was very dour. It was very New York is dying, and he didn't catch the young vote, and this guy did. And so all this money is going to Eric Adams, who is the worst. I mean, we thought de Blasio was bad. This guy's horrible. I've never seen a photo of this man at his desk. I'm going to set up a GoFundMe drive to get him an Uber to go to work. I've never seen this man he's always at a nightclub or at a restaurant or an opening or at a lounge.
And to be clear, you're talking about Eric Adams.
Eric Adams. This is the worst thing. We thought de Blasio was bad. No, he's worse. But this is the best thing that happened to Eric Adams. The best thing, because the pro-business community is not going to allow this to happen. They are going to get behind whoever is not a socialist, whoever's not going to go after landlords and taxes. Stocks are dropping. You look like literally like Verando, one of the major real estate owners in New York City. Their stock dropped because of this. The pro-business community is not going to allow this man to get elected.
And why is it that Democrats don't seem to understand this and the eventuality of
Well,
this?
I think it's because the pro-business approach has not been good for regular people. That's why we're paying such outrageous costs in rent. That's why we're paying such ridiculous levels of money on, you can talk about inflation and everything else, but a lot of it is greed. A lot of corporate America raised prices, blaming COVID, blaming inflation, blaming all kinds of things. But even when inflation went down, even when COVID and we recovered, they kept charging people more because they had gotten them used to it. And so you can squeeze people so much, and then they're going to, hit back. And that's what we're seeing with Mamdani. And I don't think we can neglect that or simply pretend that the business community is going to get its way right now. I agree with you, Jeremy, that it breathes new light in Eric Adams' campaign. I don't know that this is the end for the ideas on affordability and actually providing a social safety net that Mamdani brought. That has to be taken seriously.
But it's a conversation. It's a wish list. It's not the real skills that you need in order to work things through Albany. And if Democrats are just going to sit around making wish lists without the context of the legislative process, then I think they deserve what they're getting. And Mamdani's is not gonna be able to make do with the things he's promising. I think Cuomo was way more able to do the things that needed to be dealt with.
I mean, look, I think New York is the numbers are strong because Democrats own New York.
Yeah,
but you do have the Jewish vote to contend with. What happens when you actually get into a general election? It's also unclear to me how much of the vote was depressed because it was a very, very hot day. That doesn't mean that Cuomo would have won. I think Cuomo was on track to lose no matter what. And Mamdani did a great job of mobilizing his voters. But I think when you get into the general election, it looks different despite the Democratic supermajority. And if you get a fractured vote, if you get multiple candidates, it could turn into something else.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand that portion. But Cuomo, for all his problems, was a serious, seasoned executive.
I don't think we can discount that the women's vote played a significant role in taking him down, because the perspective that is being voiced is, how do we criticize Donald Trump over his conviction and everything else that he did, and then give a pass to Andrew Cuomo over the allegations against him?
I understand that point, and I think that that's a valid.
That's where Eric Adams is going to step into that space to be able to, he ostensibly had a prosecution dropped against him to help with ICE raids.
Right.
And so he's definitely not looking great.
It'll be interesting to see if they end up with Adams. That would be
It's still possible. I think Mamdani's win breathes new life into the Adams campaign. And now let's turn over to Virginia's 11th congressional district, where a special election is unfolding after the passing of Congressman Jerry Connolly. 10 Democratic candidates are scrambling to win a firehouse primary this Saturday, June 28th. There are 17 polling locations open throughout the day across the district. The winner will be the likely victor in November in this heavily Democratic district. So here's my hot take on the candidates based on the forum hosted by WJLA this week, which we're also going to link to so that you can judge for yourself. First, there's James Walkinshaw, who was Congressman Jerry Connolly's chief of staff for many years and is now the chair of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Connolly endorsed him before his death in May after a bout with esophageal cancer. And Connolly was very popular, but Democrats are shunning candidates that they perceive as anointed by an old and ineffective establishment. So the endorsement may well hurt Walkinshaw. The people are still reeling from what happened with Biden-Kamala. Walkinshaw, of course, has name recognition, so he's easily the favorite. And he is as polished as a congressional candidate can get. A key thing to watch, though, when answering a question on Iran and when pressed on Gaza, Walkinshaw sounded like a more traditional candidate that may well be out of touch with the type of democratic socialists that powered Mamdani in New York. Now, District Virginia 11 is more balanced on those issues, but Walkinshaw's answers are likely to mobilize progressives to turn out against him. And of course, other candidates looked impressive too. Leopoldo Martinez Nucete delivered a good performance He spoke well about his experience fighting an autocratic regime in Venezuela, of course, that time on the left, and having to flee political persecution and how that prepares him to take on the Trump administration. He also talked about his experience in the federal government and in the private sector, connecting that to his ability to deliver on building economic opportunity. And he understands that the immigration issue has to be talked about as an economic issue if we're to make any progress. That's something that gets lost in the daily coverage. So he did particularly well. Another strong candidate is Amy Roma, an attorney and internationally recognized expert on energy policy. She spent her career at the intersection of law, energy, and national security. And look, her responses were really credible about what she could do in office, but she also leveled with voters about what's possible. She stood out. There's also Amy Papineau, the other Amy, a 28-year career Fed and former CIA operations officer. She delivered a convincing pitch on how her experience is relevant to the moment we're living in. If the two Amy's misstepped at all, it's only in that some of their answers seem to suggest that either Republicans in Congress or in the administration would listen to experts like them. In normal times, sure, but Republicans are largely bowing down to the Trump administration, even when it's destructive. And so I don't know how much that really helps them. But both looked like strong candidates who know what they're doing and can stand up for the federal workforce in a district where that really matters, as we talked about with the attacks that are still happening on the federal workforce on the part of the Trump administration. And then there's Irene Shin, who currently serves in the Virginia House of Delegates. She defined herself as the clear progressive candidate at this forum. If Zohran Mamdani's victory speaks to the broader party's dynamics and not just New York, Shin may well surprise people on Saturday. But that could also turn out voters against her who are concerned about a far left tilt. I'm not sure Virginia 11 is far left enough for Shin, but she has defeated an incumbent before and certainly knows how to mobilize her voters. There were others. Stella Pekarsky, a former educator and state senator. She had some good lines. But like Dan Lee, a former staffer at the White House and the World Bank and for the governor of Massachusetts, they focused on more of the kitchen table issues, the staple of the Democratic agenda and in traditional times, but they didn't stand out in the forum. Nor did Candace Bennett and Dr. Priya Panus, who also participated at the forum. But again, we're going to link to the video so that you guys can make your own decisions. And if you live in the district, regardless of who you support, get out there and participate. Again, 17 polling locations open this Saturday. So, Carl, your hot take on how things are looking in Virginia 11.
Yeah, and we live here in the DMV, so it's relevant. So the race in Virginia, I mean, it could echo what just happened in New York. I mean, progressives riding the momentum while sort of an institutional or a centrist Democrat tries to scramble to hold the center. But, let's be honest. Again, what works in the deep blue districts like this, it might be more of a warning than a roadmap. I think the Republican base is reliably conservative and they can run to the right. I think the Democratic base is more diverse and still can't be taken for granted. But running to the left, I think, is something that can energize Democrats, especially in blue areas, but it won't unite a national coalition. And that's the big risk here. I think if Democrats keep rewarding ideological performance over practical competence, they're going to continue to struggle in purple states and competitive House districts. And I think winning in a vacuum, it just isn't a strategy. It's an echo chamber, and the stakes are far too high for that. And we saw how Donald Trump was able to pick it apart in a national election. And I hope Democrats can work through this period and then be pragmatic and get candidates that appeal to a bigger swath of just the base.
A lot to keep an eye out for, both in New York and Virginia. We'll keep you posted as it unfolds. Jeremy, thank you. Thank you, Carl. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And thanks again to Joel for joining us today. I think it was a great episode. Our panel: former Obama White House aide and former DHS spokesperson Louis Miranda, former Clinton appointee and former senior Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Carl Meacham, former CBS executive, publicist, and author, Jeremy Murphy,